The answer really to the question for us, I'll be extremely transparent, is it is very important to align with our strategic vision. I would say culturally and organizationally, strategic planning and the production of strategic plans have been baked into what we do culturally and operationally. We did this with our international partners during the Human Genome Project. 3 successive strategic plans guided us through the Human Genome Project. But then when the Genome Project ended, literally the day the Genome Project ended, the Institute put out its own unique strategic plan in 2003, and that was followed up by another one, our most recent one in 2011. This is how the Institute really develops its scientific priorities and also helps develop priorities more broadly for the genomics community. Now, the 2011 strategic plan, which is the one we currently operate in, I think it's still pretty good. I'm probably extremely biased. I think it serves a very good framework for almost everything the Institute is doing. I think it serves a very good framework for many of the things being discussed at a meeting like this. The truth of the matter is, I would love for this plan to go on, but the fact of the matter is, we must recognize things are advancing in breathtaking speed. We've talked about that at this meeting. This strategic plan came out of discussions in 2009. It was written basically in 2010 and published in 2011. And so being realistic and being practical, I just can't defend or claim that our 2011 strategic plan represents a suitable blueprint as we think about the next decade in 2020 and beyond. And so it's with that in mind that earlier this year, we formally kicked off a new round of strategic planning. We did this in February, and we had in mind, by the time we kicked it off, a pretty good idea of what this was going to look like. We've done this before as an institute and as a community. Our early planning for this was in 2017. We kicked it off. We know this process, at least the way we do it, takes at least a couple of years to do it well and to engage enough people well. So we realized we wanted it published in 2020, which was a good timestamp anyway. And we scanned across 2020 and said, let's publish it the first week in October, which will be the 30th anniversary of the launch of the Human Genome Project. And then you can just back everything up. When you have to submit a manuscript, we will publish this. And when you have to have some sort of a finale gathering to look at a complete draft of that manuscript. So that basically gives us this interval of time to go through a series of elements and events that will give us the input we need to put a document and then publish such a document. We've done this before, but times have changed, so we knew we would use old tools and we knew we would bring in new tools. The kind of things we are doing, the elements are old tools, right? We do workshops. We invite people to the DC area and we put them in windowless conference rooms and we strategize the way we've done things here for the past couple of days. But we also realize that the world is different, and I'll have more to say about it in a bit, but genomics is broader than our grantees. Genomics is everywhere, it's worldwide, but it's all pervasive across the biomedical research landscape. We knew we needed to get out and talk to people that we normally don't talk to through town halls and go to existing meetings, not just the usual genomics meetings, but there's many additional scientific meetings that touch genomics or that embrace genomics or use genomics. We need to take advantage of going to those places, talking to those people that we don't normally talk to get that input. We've taken this actually quite seriously. It's only been going since February, and shown here is a list of all the gatherings and events to date. It's nearly 30. And there's many more planned and many more that will be upcoming in the near term. There are two, ironically, that have significant overlap with what's happening here the past couple of days. One in particular is one of the workshops. We're actually not having that many Bethesda-based workshops, but one that we thought was very important and one that is planned, and you can see, and some of you I know were invited or coming to this in January. If you look at the title, you can see has substantial overlap with the kind of things we're talking about. So what we hear from you together and the output that'll come out from this gathering will be very useful not only for this gathering, but for subsequent synthesis of the input. And then the other thing which actually has some overlap relates to a conversation I had with Jeremy Farrar and said, you know, it's really, we've worked so closely, our institute with the Wellcome Trust for so many years. You know, we're crisscrossing the US to get input. We'd love to hear from Europe. We'd love to hear from our colleagues here on the other side of the ocean. He said, well, let's do something. together. Let's sort of have some sort of a strategy meeting. He asked Michael Dunn to help organize from the Wellcome Trust, and he co-opted you and Bernie to please help organize this. And then I think he brought Mark Daly and others, and some of you in this room are going to be coming to another gathering at the Wellcome Trust in February. And while that agenda is starting to come together, I am quite certain there will be a lot of overlap between the things that have been discussed here and the things that will be discussed there. This will be a means for us to get input from the European perspective into our strategic planning process, and as I'm sure it will feed into Jim Smith's gathering of information that he needs as well. So in addition to these meetings, there's obviously other things we're doing, web pages, social media. We have advisory groups we deeply engage with, including working groups and advisors of our various consortiums. Some of you are involved in this as well, and then we will have some sort of finale meeting, as I mentioned. So we are early in the process. We're not quite at halftime. Maybe it's more like a hockey game. We're at about the end of the first period, about a third of the way through. And we are sort of going to be shifting a little bit what we're going to be doing as we look towards 2019, which will be a very important year for this process. But and so more to come, and you could read about it, follow it, and I'll give you some ways to do that at the very last slide. But the one main point I wanted to make, because I think it is really important how different this process has been compared to the previous rounds, that I think very much reflect the changing role of our institute. I think many of you are familiar with the National Human Genome Research Institute, but our role in the ecosystem is changing because genomics is changing across the biomedical research enterprise. And this affects what we're going to try to accomplish and what we can realistically accomplish as part of the strategic planning process. So let me give you a couple of numbers. Some of you are more or less familiar with us, but I think there are two relevant numbers that I think are really important. You recognize that we're one of 27 institutes and centers at the NIH, and we've carried with us this remarkably exciting field of genomics from the conception to the present time. And we're the only institute that has the word genome in its title. But at the same time, despite this incredibly large intellectual and exciting field of genomics, we're a remarkably small institute. We're only about 1.5% of the NIH budget. And it's interesting that once upon a time, that was perfectly fine when genomics was just about the Genome Project, when genomics was fairly localized. With genomics being across the biomedical research landscape, it's not a whole lot of money that would be going to genomics if we were the only funder. Once upon a time at NIH, we were the only funder of genomics research. During the Human Genome Project, 100% of genomics. And if you would do keyword searches like human genome, you would see that number even 15 years ago when the Human Genome Project ended was still well over 90%. When I took over as director of the Institute 9 years ago, I can tell you that figure had come down to about 50%. Today, if you analyze the money going out with keywords, the way we can do database searches of NIH-funded work, with the word human genome, we're only supporting 15% of all human genome research. Now, this is actually good news. This is success as far as we're concerned. We've disseminated genomics across the biomedical research landscape as exemplified by NIH funding. But it does change what we do. We're not all of genomics. We're not even most of genomics. And so one of the things we've done is try to better define what our role going forward in the genomics and biomedical ecosystem. And it's much more about being at the forefront of genomics. It just practically can't be all of genomics because genomics needs more than 1.5% of NIH funding. And you can see we're only accounting for 15%. So this very much is helping to craft how we are doing the strategic planning. We practically cannot do strategic planning across all of genomics. It's way too big. We have to contain ourselves to the forefront of genomics. And our strategic planning does need to help us decide priorities for what we are going to be funding going forward. So the analogy to help sort of think about, if you like images, about how we are sort of dealing with this in the strategic planning process, as we think about it sort of as a fleet of boats, if you will, at least on behalf of NIH in particular, we are the lead boat. We are the forefront for genomics. There are things within our wake that we will continue to worry about, and there are things outside our wake that we think others are much better suited for leading. Now, some of these things we may have been heavily involved in once upon a time, but times have changed, and these things have now moved outside our wake. Things like cancer genomics, we really don't fund anymore, nor will we. Microbial genomics or microbiome research, important areas, cancer, microbial work. But there are better institutes at NIH and elsewhere around the world, others, to lead these efforts. It's just not what we would be best suited to do. And there's probably other areas we will identify. But then there's things within our wake, and the things within our wake are even bigger than what we can fund, but it doesn't mean we can't be involved in strategically planning. And so I put some, and notice the gray areas of the wake are topics like rare and common diseases, which is why we're here and listening intently. There will be far more money invested at NIH in the study of common diseases using genomic approaches by other institutes than by us. But I think we can still be important intellectual leaders or co-leaders with some of the other institutes. Similarly, the same with computational genomics and data science. And there are other of these gray areas where we will be in partnership with other NIH institutes in strategically planning and in funding. There are mainstream areas that very much will be key to what we do going forward. They will always, I think, or at least for the foreseeable future, be at the forefront of genomics. I list not a comprehensive list, but a prototypic list, the kind of areas that we've been involved in, many of which have been touched at this meeting. And trust me, we are not abandoning these areas. These will absolutely be mainstream areas for us going forward. Others may fund them as well, certainly around the world, others, and we welcome that. But these will be a key focus of our strategic planning, anything within our wake, including these prototypic mainstream areas. So I will just tell you that this kind of conceptualization will very much influence where we will put our prioritization for strategic planning, and eventually I can tell you where we'll put our prioritization in terms of funding. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I will tell you that the output of a gathering like this will be immensely helpful to us. It will absolutely feed in to the discussions, to these other workshops, 2 gatherings I mentioned, and I'm sure ultimately the kind of document that we put together. And that will very much tailor the kinds of, or help frame the kind of decision-making process we'll go through for making decisions about what we're going to be funding in 2020 and beyond. Please, we're interested in your input, lots of ways to follow us. We're being very transparent in the strategic planning process. The website captures lots of this. You can email us anytime. You can follow us on social media. I will stop there, take any questions, and enjoy your lunch.
Glad to hear you are eagerly awaiting our output.
Yes.
Our issue, perhaps.
Rory. Rory Collins.
Yeah, hi, Rory.
Eric, thanks very much. Can I ask a question from the perspective of NIH funding more widely? So, you know, if we think about some of these large prospective cohorts, like UK Biobank increasingly becoming international resources and being used more and more widely, we've seen with UK Biobank with other cohorts that the Wellcome Trust and MRC have taken the lead in developing it, maintaining it. We're now starting to see more international funding from industry.
Yep.
But do you think that both for projects like UK Biobank, but for other projects that really provide resources internationally, there is potential for the NIH to be part of the funding of that? Because it hasn't, as far as I'm aware, really been happening beyond the US.
So I think it's a great question. Oh, by the way, I want to also point out, I forgot to mention, sorry, Carolyn Hutter is here and will be here this afternoon, even though I have to depart early as one of my division directors. And I can tell you she's been involved in some of many of the important discussions around all of us, which reminded me that I should introduce her, make sure everybody knows who she is to talk to later this afternoon. It's a hard question. As you know, it's taken a lot of effort to identify and get the resources just for NIH to get into the game. Through the All of Us research program, and that is requiring a tremendous amount of resources. Whether NIH would ever be poised, or whether I could imagine a mechanism or an attitude to support other international cohorts per se, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'd even be optimistic. On the other hand, the things that bring them together, the things that develop pipelines, analytical pipelines to analyze them across in a very integrative way, and you, I know, are involved, along with Terry Manolio and others, to try to internationally better coordinate these cohorts. I think that's the kind of path that would lead to NIH funding. But I think sort of funding for the fundamental platforms, the fundamental maintenance, probably not, but maybe the maintenance of the data if it was in an integrative way. Then I could imagine making the argument.
Great.
There was one.
Eric.
Oh.
So I think it's safe to say this here because there's only one NIH institute represented.
Right.
It is true that 15% is the proportion of things that say human genome that you fund. And there's a lot of stuff going on at other institutes. But it's often not as well thought out and organized and effective. And so in your strategic plan, in these gray areas, computational, disease, whatever, in addition to just partnering with others and all that, I think the leadership role methodologically to make these things efficient and effective cannot be, you know, it's greatly disproportionate to the 15%. And I'm hoping NHGRI is intending to lead, even if it doesn't necessarily say that as directly as I might in this room.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's really why our strategic plan at the end of the day is so important. It will, I am confident it will be read by the other NIH institutes and the key people make. And so I think we can intellectually lead on the strategic plan, and then we will partner on the funding. And I probably mushed those two sentences together because I was trying to be very brief. But no, we aim to be the intellectual leaders, and we want to be funding partners, and then we'll tell them how to spend their money. Right. Yes.
Quick question, but then we're done.
Yes.
You have this history of strategic plans.
Yeah.
Looking back over them, you know, what do, going through these kinds of exercises, do we tend to overestimate, what we tend to underestimate the impact of?
Well, I would say in the past, some of the things we've underestimated have been some of the complex societal issues. I mean, data sharing. I mean, we anticipated it, but I don't think I would have last time have anticipated quite as much. I think the other thing while we touched on in our previous strategic plan, we probably didn't make data science sort of more front and center. We sort of said it's everywhere, so I think that was another area. You know, if you dissect the strategic plan, there's some things we were overly optimistic, and some things we just weren't bold enough because it ended up being accomplished much sooner than we would have anticipated. It's sort of a mixed bag in that way.